Welcome back to the Body Composition Coach podcast. And as always, it is Jono speaking, and I'm going to make this a quick one for you. And the reason I'm just going to do this really quickly with this podcast is just because one of the biggest problems that I've kind of noticed coming up recently, one of the things that I've talked most about is a particular element of the build phase. And I want to make sure that I've helped you with that. Now, you hear me talk all the time about how important a build phase is. You hear me talk all the time about how it's so important to fuel yourself properly, how it's so important to build muscle as a female. Now, I'm going to talk about probably the area here where this goes wrong the most. Now, before I do that, as always, please give me a review. Let me know what you think. Leave me a comment. Let me know and share your thoughts. It helps me shape the podcast and also helps me get this podcast out to the people who really need it. Maybe like yourself. So look, the subject that I'm going to cover for you today is reverse dieting. Now, you may have seen my opinion on this across the internet somewhere. My opinion's everywhere. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But I have talked about reverse dieting before. Now, the thing that I also talked about before and still talk about quite a lot is the build phase. So having specific phases of your training cycle, of your nutrition cycle, where you are focused specifically on building muscle. Now, where do these two things come into play? Well, a lot of people, when they've been dieting for a long time, they hear the myth or they're told a story by like a medical professional or a coach that they need to go through a reverse diet to rebuild their metabolism. And if you can't see me, I'm putting quotation marks on that, rebuild their metabolism after a long time dieting. So what I'm going to do for you is explain the actual circumstances and the science behind what's going on, whether you really need to do a reverse diet, and where I would or wouldn't use it. Now, what I will say to you straight away is I think reverse dieting is one of the biggest cons in the fitness industry, but I use it with most clients. Now, that's quite a strong statement, and I will explain it, but the reality is I do think that reverse dieting is completely unnecessary, is not required for a lot of people physiologically. It's the psychological part of reverse dieting that I think is really, really useful. So if we set the scene here a little bit, when you have been doing a dieting phase, when you've been restricting calories, when you've been in a calorie deficit for a while, what tends to happen is we get what we call metabolic adaptation. Metabolic adaptation is simply your body slowing things down a little bit. Your body realizes that you are in a deficit. It realizes that you are underfueling and purposely underfueling. Like you're underfueling because you're trying to lose body fat. That's okay for a short period of time. So you're underfueling for a little while, your body starts to click onto that and it thinks, okay, where can I be a little bit more efficient with my spending of my calories, expending of energy? So it comes across things like steps and it will maybe put a little bit less effort, just a tiny little bit less effort in every step that you do. Like me talking to you here, I joke with my clients all the time about how handsy I am and how energetic I am with my gestures when I talk. Again, if you caught me in a fat loss phase, you'd probably notice that I do that a little bit less. Now, I don't really notice it, but you probably would see it. Also, kind of, if we go to the more extremes, potentially we see things like within females especially, like them losing their periods. Again, if they've been in a period of restricted dieting, that is also another kind of byproduct or side effect of metabolic adaptation when your body cannot afford to spend any energy on a period because it's not being fed enough. Now, that is an extreme case and actually verges and crosses a line into an unhealthy situation. But metabolic adaptation generally, I'm not talking about the cycle loss here, but metabolic adaptation generally is a normal thing to happen. So when your body goes through metabolic adaptation, you may, I'm going to pick some random numbers here, you may go from having a maintenance of 2,000 calories to a maintenance of 1,700 calories or 1,800 calories. Now, you will probably be eating less than that. So you'll be in maybe, let's say your deficit is 1,500. So you're still in a deficit, you're just in less of a deficit because of the metabolic adaptation. Now, when you're ready to leave your deficit and move back into your build phase, which again, I push all the time, you should be doing a build phase. If you're not doing a build phase, you should be doing one. Like, I don't really care who you are. You should be doing a build phase at some point. If you've never done one, then you are making some mistakes with your training cycle, and therefore you absolutely should be. I'll get that out of there straight away. So you're transitioning from your fat loss to your build. Now, what a lot of people do here and what they get wrong is they think that by going through a particular protocol, potentially like reverse dieting or called reverse dieting, that they need to bring their metabolism back up to speed. They need to raise that maintenance from 17 to 18 to 19 to 2000, and they need to do it slowly and they need to do it carefully. Let me tell you this, your body is a very, very clever thing. As soon as you start eating more calories and fueling it properly, it will adapt very, very quickly. You will start expending more energy in your hand gestures. You'll start expending more energy on your day-to-day tasks and activities and moving around that you're probably just very unaware of. So your maintenance will very, very quickly go back from 17, 1800 up to the 2000 that it was at before without you really doing that much different, just eating more. So the idea that you need to go through this long reverse dieting phase actually could be quite detrimental, because instead of going back to maintenance and getting on with your build phase, what ends up happening is you spend so much time not really eating enough to fuel yourself properly for the build and being in this like kind of tiny deficit. Like you're not really at maintenance and build yet, but you're also not really in a deficit anymore. You're still having to restrict a little bit. So the delay can be 5, 6, 7 weeks when actually you could have spent that time just getting straight back to maintenance and nudging yourself above it to get into that build phase quickly. So I'm talking from like a physiological point of view here. From a physiological point of view, you don't need to do a reverse diet. You can just go from your dieting calories back to your maintenance calories. Your body weight will wobble a little bit, and then you will then eventually settle into your maintenance and your body will adapt very quickly. But I'm going to just pick up on a point that I made there. Your body weight will wobble a little bit. So this is the key point. And I said to you right at the start of this podcast, even though I think reverse dieting is the biggest con in the fitness industry, or one of, because people sell it to you as this special thing that they're going to do for you, which means you don't gain fat when you start eating more food. I still use it. I still think it has huge amounts of value. And this is where like good coaching comes into play, because it is not required physiologically if we're being honest about it. But where I see it as has huge value is the psychological transition. The biggest problem females have in doing the build phase, which I keep telling you is so important, but the biggest problem that I see in all the women that I work with is the psychological side of transitioning to a build. Simply because, I mentioned it a second ago, your weight wobbles, even increases and spikes. You start to feel a little bit bloated, maybe a little bit like fluffy as we describe it. Maybe you start to feel a little bit heavier. Maybe you start to feel different in some way. It is very, very uncomfortable sometimes when we start to eat more food because you feel like you're moving away from the goal that you've worked so hard to achieve. And this is where the reverse diet plays a fantastic role. Because even though physiologically it's not required, if you just slowly bring yourself back to maintenance, what you then tend to do is just blunt the spike. So the whole spike in weight that happens when you start to increase your food is quite a big one if you jump straight from like your low deficit into a build phase. You will see a lot of turbulence in the scales. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, it's not that you've just suddenly gained loads of fat. It doesn't mean that it doesn't affect you psychologically. It doesn't mean that it doesn't feel like a huge blow psychologically that you've just like stuck a kilo on the scales overnight. So from my point of view, what I want to do with a female client when I am taking her from a dieting phase into a build phase, I want to make that transition as smooth as I possibly can. So even though physiologically it doesn't make a difference, if I can blunt that spike for her, if I can make her feel more comfortable and in control throughout that transition period and not see her weight spike, not see her gain loads of water overnight, not make her feel fluffy very quickly, what that's going to allow me to do is make her feel more comfortable in the build phase initially, but also manage that build phase really, really well. Because again, the worst thing that can happen when you do transition someone from dieting to building is they get uncomfortable too quickly. If within like 2 weeks of being in a build phase, they're uncomfortable, you are going to have, as a coach, you're going to have a huge job on your hands trying to keep them in that build phase long enough, because they're almost on autopilot. They're going to want to go back to dieting again. And most of the women that I work with have done that before, right? They've tried to go into a build phase, ended up getting uncomfortable within like 3 or 4 weeks, and then just gone back to a diet again. So they haven't actually spent enough time in the build to significantly gain any muscle over over that period of time. So although physiologically there's no reason for you to do the build, psychologically it can make a huge, huge difference. Now, I think the next element to this is when you have successfully transitioned a female from a dieting phase into a maintenance slash build phase, you've blunted the spike a little bit, you've made her feel more comfortable, you've got her to stay there a little bit longer. The next thing that fitness influencers, especially who maybe don't quite understand the physiological side of training that well, one of the things that they will say is, okay, but you can like reverse diet your maintenance to be a lot higher. Look, if you think by going through some like special reverse dieting protocol, you can start at 2000 maintenance, drop your calories down to 1500 and your maintenance come down to like 17, 18, go back to eating 2000 and your maintenance come back up to 2000, and then suddenly you're going to take your maintenance from like 2000 to 2100, 200, 300, 400, 500. And listen, I've seen it claimed all over Instagram. People claim that they took their maintenance calories from like 1800 calories to 3000 calories because they did this weird reverse dieting protocol. Believe me that you're being conned if you think that that is going to happen. If you build, so for like a female especially, you're probably looking at a good year of training with some really good hypertrophy protocol style training, some very, very good and accurate and consistent nutrition. Across a year, you might gain a couple of kilos of muscle, 2 kilos, right? And that's a good year. So if you do that, let's say you do gain a couple of kilos, you'd probably expect your maintenance calories to go up around 100-ish calories maybe a day. Maybe. Probably more like 60 to 80. Like a good increase a year would be like 100 calories. So that's with like training like a bodybuilder, genuinely. So let's say it's about 60, right? Because it probably is closer to that number. I'm kind of just throwing some random numbers out here because it depends on the individual, obviously. But let's call it 60. Over the course of a year, you've got an extra banana a day to play with. And that's a year of like really intense and hard and structured and consistent training. So this idea that there's this special reverse dieting protocol that is one, going to stop you gaining body fat when you come out of a fat loss phase. Probably not quite true because it depends. When you go to maintenance, by the way, you won't just gain loads of body fat because you're at maintenance. Like maintenance is still maintenance. If you're 19% body fat when you come back to maintenance and you're at maintenance, you will stay at 19% body fat. You may just feel a little bit heavier because you've got extra glycogen in the muscles. You'll feel a little bit heavier because you're holding a little bit of extra water. For every gram of glycogen and carbs you store in your muscle, you store about 3 grams of water. Won't show in terms of body fat, but will show in terms of scale weight. So if you come back to maintenance and you're at 19% body fat, you're still at 19% body fat. You're just not in a deficit anymore. So you're not going to get to 18 and 17 and 16. You're just going to stay at 19% body fat, right? You're not going to suddenly gain loads of weight. But to think that then you can stay at 19% body fat and take your calories from 2000 to 2100, 200, 300, 400, 500 over the course of like a few months of training hard, it's just not going to happen. Like you can reach those levels, but you're probably talking about 5 to 10 years of extremely consistent and dedicated training time. And look, like the bodies and the figures and the physiques that you see, again, with some of the women that I work with some of the women that you see online, they got there because they did this for years. They did this. They didn't just do this for a few months. They did years of graft and training hard like a bodybuilder and making sacrifice to be able to go from a maintenance that might have been 2000 to maybe 2300. And that's literally the difference. And, you know, look, I'm not saying that, oh, okay, weightlifting isn't worthwhile and hypertrophy training isn't worthwhile and you shouldn't try and build muscle. Like, your main focus should be trying to build muscle. What I am saying is you don't need a very special reverse dieting protocol physiologically. You probably might need one, and this is where structure, strategy, and good coaching comes in. You probably might need a reverse dieting protocol just to help you with the transition from fat loss to maintenance and build, to blunt the spike a little bit, to feel like you're in control of that process a little bit more. I have no issue with reverse dieting from that point of view. And then when you get to the other end of the scale, you also aren't going to take your maintenance from 2000 to 2500 through a little bit of strength training. So hopefully that's cleared up a few things for you around reverse dieting. Hopefully that's cleared up a few things for you in terms of whether you need to do a reverse diet or not. I suppose if I'm going to summarize it for you, you don't need to do one. But if you're a female who struggles to take herself into the build phase because you feel uncomfortable, because you start to feel like you're getting fluffy too quickly, and you struggle to hold yourself in the build phase for long enough, I absolutely, personally, would be taking you through a reverse diet, keep you in control of it, blunt the spike in terms of scale weight, take you just gradually into that maintenance and build phase, not gain any body fat, and also it just keeps you in control and gives you an element of control over the next steps. If you get to maintenance and like into the build, still feeling like you're happy, confident, in control of your body and your food and your whole situation, it's going to make that build phase just so much more successful. If we go into it on turbulent ground with a scale that's fluctuating loads, with your weight spiking massively, with you instantly feeling uncomfortable, it just makes my job as a coach navigating that build phase with you really, really difficult because you're starting uncomfortable and you're about to be uncomfortable for a reasonable period of time through that build. And look, the longer you stay in the build, the better the result you're going to get. So therefore, if you're uncomfortable after just a couple of weeks, it's going to be a long, long journey. So look, as always, hopefully that was useful. Hopefully you've taken something away from that. If you do have any questions on reverse dieting, whether it's for you, how I would structure reverse dieting protocols, how I've done it with clients before, I've got some examples I can show you. Just drop me a message on Instagram at Body Composition Coach, or drop me a comment below this video or around this video, and I will come back to you. But look, in the meantime, as always, just drop me a review. Let me know what you thought. Give me 5 stars if you've been watching. Thousands and thousands of you listen to this podcast. Just a few hundred have left reviews. So every little review is helpful in getting this podcast out to those people who need it. So as well, if you do want to work with us, if you want some help actually navigating through the dieting phase into the reverse diet, into the build phase, you just got to reach out to me on Instagram again at Body Composition Coach. And until the next time, I will see you then.